Hello everyone, I am the Scary Midnight Dreams and I am here to help you to sleep today. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also comment where are you from and what time is in your country right now. The Cry of the Banshee's Hill. There are places in this world where the air itself seems to carry with it the weight of sorrow, where the earth beneath one's feet seems to groan with the burden of old secrets, and where the winds that sweep through the hills carry whispers of forgotten tales. The village of Carrickmore, nestled deep within the mist-clad hills of the Irish countryside, was one such place. It had long been a home to farmers, fishermen, and those whose lives were bound to the rhythms of nature. But like so many places in the world, it bore the scars of its past, scars that could not be healed by the passing of time. I had come to Carrickmore as a stranger, drawn by the promise of peace and solitude, a brief respite from the tumult of city life. The villagers were kind enough, though their eyes often held a strange, distant look, as if they were forever watching the horizon for something that never came. The village itself was small, its stone cottages huddled together like old friends, the smoke from their chimneys rising in thin tendrils that disappeared into the thick gray sky. The hills surrounding Carrickmore were dark and foreboding, their slopes dotted with ancient stone circles and weathered cairns, relics of a time long past. It was on the third evening of my stay that I first heard the wail. I had been walking along the winding path that led to the hilltop, a place known to the villagers as Banshee's Hill. The hill was said to be haunted by the spirit of a woman who had once lived in the village, a woman whose tragic death had left a stain upon the land. The villagers spoke of her in hushed tones, their faces pale and their voices trembling when her name was mentioned. They called her Ain, and they said that her wail, a mournful cry that echoed through the hills, was a harbinger of death. At first I had dismissed the stories as mere superstition, the fanciful tales of an old, isolated community. But as I reached the summit of Banshee's Hill that evening, I felt a strange chill in the air, a sudden drop in temperature that seemed to seep into my very bones. The wind had died down, and for a moment there was an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant rustling of leaves. It was then that I heard it, a sound so haunting and so filled with despair that it sent a shiver down my spine. The wail was distant at first, a low, keening cry that seemed to rise from the very depths of the earth. It grew louder with each passing moment until it filled the air around me, reverberating through the hills like a funeral dirge. The sound was unmistakable, a banshee's wail, the cry of a spirit mourning the death of a soul. But this time it was different. The cry did not seem to come from the distant past, as the villagers had always claimed. It was not the wail of a woman who had died long ago. No, this cry was for someone who still walked among the living. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, and looked toward the village below. The cottages were bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, their windows flickering like the eyes of watchful sentinels. But in the stillness of the night, I could see the faint outline of a figure standing at the edge of the village, staring up at the hill. It was a man, tall and thin, his face obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. He stood motionless, as if he were waiting for something, or someone. The wail echoed again, louder this time, and I felt a strange compulsion to move toward the figure. It was as though the cry itself was calling to me, urging me to step into the darkness. As I descended the hill, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over me. The air seemed thick with the weight of something unseen, and the wail continued to pierce the night, its mournful cry echoing through the village like the tolling of a death bell. When I reached the edge of the village, the figure was gone. In his place stood a woman, her long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders like a veil of shadow. She was dressed in a simple white gown, her bare feet sinking into the earth as she moved toward me. Her eyes, when they met mine, were cold and empty, as though she had seen the very depths of death and returned with nothing but sorrow. "You should not have come here," she said, her voice low and tremulous, like the wind through the trees. "This place is cursed. The cry of the banshee is not a warning for the living. It is a call for those who are already dead." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. The wail echoed once more, louder now, and I could feel the ground beneath my feet tremble with the force of it. The woman stepped closer, her face pale and drawn, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "The cry of the banshee? It is not for you, nor for me. It is for him." She pointed toward the village, and I turned to follow her gaze. There, standing at the edge of the village square, was the man I had seen earlier, the one with the wide-brimmed hat. He was no longer standing motionless. Instead, he was moving, his steps slow and deliberate, as though he were walking toward some inevitable fate. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The woman's eyes darkened and she took a step back, as though the very mention of his name filled her with dread. "His name is Amen," she said. "He is the one the banshee calls for, but he is already dead." I stared at her in confusion. Dead, but he stands there in front of us. He is alive. She shook her head, her expression one of sorrow and pity. "He died long ago," she said softly, "but he does not know it. He has been walking the earth for years, trapped in a world between life and death. The banshee calls to him, but he cannot hear her. He does not know that his time has passed." The wail echoed again, louder now, a shrill cry that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the night. I turned back to look at Amen, but he had disappeared, his figure swallowed by the shadows of the village. The woman stepped forward, her hand outstretched as though to stop me. "You must not follow him," she warned. "The banshee's cry is a warning. If you follow him, you will be lost to the same fate." But it was too late. Without thinking, I moved toward the village, my feet carrying me forward, as though some unseen force were guiding me. The wail of the banshee grew louder still, its cry now a deafening scream that filled my ears and rattled my bones. I could hear Amen's footsteps ahead of me, slow and deliberate, his shadow flickering in the dim light of the village. As I reached the square, I saw him standing before a stone well, his hands trembling as he reached for the rope that dangled from the edge. His face was pale, his eyes wide and vacant, as though he were staring into the abyss. "Amen!" I called, my voice trembling. "You must stop! You are already dead!" But he did not respond. He merely continued his slow, deliberate movements, his hands grasping the rope as he prepared to lower it into the well. And then, with a final, piercing wail, the banshee's cry reached its crescendo. The earth trembled beneath my feet, and I felt the ground give way beneath me. The air around me grew thick with the scent of decay, and I felt a cold hand grip my heart, squeezing the life from me. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Amen, his face contorted in a silent scream as he was pulled into the well, his body vanishing into the depths below.